Thank you very much. What an intro. So, situation normal, everything must change. I'm actually going to talk to you about something called mapping. And I'm going to talk about why mapping is important for strategy. Now, I realize I'm the last speaker before you get to your drinks. So, really, do I have to talk about strategy? Because it's one of those awful words. Because when we talk about this subject, we think people like this are going to turn up. And they're going to turn up with their framework, which will be something along the lines of a 3-step plan. So have a good story. Agile all the things, so agile development, agile operations, agile strategy, and agile for your agile. And then you should focus on core. So I'm going to take a slightly different angle. I'm actually going to talk about crossing the river by feeling the stones, an idea, a concept by Deng Xiaoping, a great Chinese leader and economist. And he was talking about managing the economy, because it's constantly changing. That's the normal state. You have to think of it as having purpose and direction and adapting, so crossing the river by feeling the stones. So to give me a base level set here, I'm just going to ask you all a question. What do you think strategy is like in the boardrooms of most companies? Do you think it's like a game of chess, or is it alchemy, gut feel, whatever's popular in the HBR? So who's for chess? We have some optimists. Who's for alchemy, gut feel? Yep, so we're pretty much dominated by realists. Any cowardly custards like hanging around in the middle? A couple, right. Okay, super. So I'm going to talk about strategy. I'm going to wind the clock back, all the way back to Sun Tzu, The Art of War. So Sun Tzu said that what was important when you're competing against others are 5 factors. 1, have a purpose, a moral imperative. 2, understand the landscape. 3, understand the climate, then doctrine, so the operational techniques that you'll use, and then you're into leadership and strategic play. Now, unfortunately, in the West, we tend to think of this as sort of a linear sort of path, a bit like our 3-step plan. It's actually not. It's much more of an adaptive cycle. And the best way of thinking about it, I find, is with a game that I love, which is paintball. So you start off having a purpose, like we're going to take the building. And the next thing you need to do is understand the landscape. Unless you're, of course, a bunch of newbies, in which case you charge in and it's epic fail. So now we need sort of a strategy. We're going to do covering fire and a ground assault, and then we'll apply a bit of doctrine. So we'll break into 2 teams, and then off we go. We start acting. And of course, what will happen is the climate will change because, somebody is in the other building with their tactical sniper rifle taking us out at distance. And so doctrine will kick in, we'll return fire, and one group will dive to safety because we've been doing lots of training. We'll update the purpose. We now want to take out the sniper. The landscape changes, and we have a new strategy. Suppression fire, maybe do a bit of flanking. Okay? Now, the best way of understanding this cycle that you go through is actually through the work of the mad major, John Boyd, what he called OODA loops. So you have the game, you observe the environment, you orientate yourself around it, then you decide, and then you act. And so if you simply combine Sun Tzu and John Boyd together, you get the strategy cycle. So you start off with the purpose, the game. You understand you observe the landscape and the climate, you orientate around it, so doctrine, and then you're into the whole sort of play and you're acting. So I thought I'd go through this with an example that's very personal to me. So I used to run a site called Photango. It was Europe's largest online photo service at one point in time. And now, of course, our purpose was to be a great online photo service. The second step is to understand our landscape. Now, at this point, the consultants jump in and say, you need a good story. Well, the Vikings had good stories. This is how they used to navigate. From Hernham, head due west towards Half, and you would have sailed north of Hatland, so that you just glimpse it in clear weather, etc., which basically is that. Now, maps are much easier than stories for understanding environment. You know this yourself, because every time somebody asks you for directions, if they've got a map, you just point. And if they don't, you sort of say, well, you turn left, and then right, and then left, and they drive off, and then you're left with that moment, did I send them in the right direction? Whether accidental or, if you're evil, deliberately. Okay, so what do you use to navigate a ship? Story, map? Map. So what do we use to navigate a business? Story. Okay, so maps are really powerful because they have certain characteristics. One, you have the position of pieces on a map. Secondly, you have an anchor. So in the case of a geographical map, it is a compass. So this is north of this, south of this. You also have the ability to see movement on the map itself. So that's what I wanted to do with Fatango. This was back in 2005. I wanted to turn it into a map so we as a business could discuss how our environment was changing. Now, I was CEO of the company, so I was the fat cat. But the issue was, how do I do this? How do I turn a company into a map? So I took one of our box and wire diagrams, IT systems diagram, several million users, basically started with an anchor, which was user needs. And then I created a chain of needs, because these things at the top, providing people with photo storage, required other components. So this gave me position relative to an anchor, which is the user. But the problem is I had no concept of movement. And that's a problem, because businesses aren't static. You take somebody like Nokia, starts off as a paper mill, becomes a plastics manufacturer, then a telecommunications company, and so forth. Well, I'm not quite sure what it's becoming today, but it's something else. Okay, so I needed to have an idea of how do these components change. I know that things appear and they're like novel and exciting, like the Parthian battery, electricity provision 400 AD, and then eventually becomes more of a commodity, Westinghouse, Tesla, utility provision, electricity 1886. So how does that happen? So I started off with a piece of work by a chap called Everett Rogers, Diffusion of Innovation, of how things spread in society, from early adopters to laggards. And it's actually made famous by another speaker who's speaking tomorrow, Geoffrey Moore. He cut a bit out and talked about the chasm that you have to cross. Really important part. Okay, so here's some diffusion curves, various things. And I'll take one, cell phones, and let's look at, say, smartphones, a subset of that. 327 million smartphones, 317 million people in the US. Is it a commodity? What do you think? Some sure. Who says no? Hands up. A few. Okay. Right, well, there's a bit of debate about that one. So, a bar of gold. Does everyone in the US have a bar of gold? Is it a commodity? Yes. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem, because that means I can't use adoption to say as a measure of change. I can't say if it's 70%, it's a commodity, because sometimes it can get to 200%, everybody owning 2 of something, and it's still not a commodity. Sometimes 5%. Now, I knew the Parthian battery diffused, and it evolved as well, eventually becoming more of a commodity, and that diffused as well. So could I look at somehow how things evolved? How do we get from A to B, or A1 to A5 in my case? Because if that's evolution, that's movement, and that's the missing bit I've got from my map. So I started off looking at the diffusion curves for these things. And what happens is you get everything diffuses to 100% of its market, but the size of the markets are all different. So the early market for electricity provision, very different from the later stage market. And what's even worse is the time spans are different. So that means I can't use adoption to measure change. I can't even use time to measure change. So is there anything that I can predict with? Well, turns out that if you look at this pattern, what you discover is things become more ubiquitous, as in widespread, but they also become more certain. So we start off with things like electricity and the electric light, and we have posters like this. This room is equipped with Edison electric light. Do not attempt to light with a match. Use the switch, because no one knows quite what this thing is. And then over time, we forget to tell people this, because everybody knows, just push the switch. So if you look at ubiquity versus certainty, a different pattern appears. What you find is you get the genesis of things the first time it appears, then you get custom-built examples, then products, then rental services, then commodity, and then utility services. So we get things like the Parthian battery. It diffuses, and then the Hippolyte Pixie, it diffuses, a different diffusion curve. Products like Siemens generators, another diffusion curve, another chasm to cross, and then eventually utility provision of electricity, another diffusion curve, another chasm to cross. So in the process of evolution, thousands of diffusion curves and often thousands of chasms. And it's all driven by demand and supply competition. Okay, so this is movement. So now what I've got is I've got my anchor, user needs, I've got position, I can add movement, and I can produce a map of the business, which is what I did in 2005. Anchor, position, movement. Just like a normal geographical map. Fantastic, yay, so what? Well, if I can map the environment, I can now start to observe climactic patterns. So these are the rules that influence the game. So for example, you don't send your navy out to sea in a storm. So here's my map from 2005. I take something like platform. I know it's going to evolve due to competition. So eventually it will become more of a utility. I also know it has a past. It started somewhere. It was that genesis. Everything on your map is constantly evolving due to competition, which is why situation normal everything must change is true. If there's competition, everything will change. Now, it has a past and a future. Now, the past is in this uncharted, unexplored space. It's chaotic, uncertain, unpredictable, unknown. And eventually, whatever it is, money, penicillin, computing, doesn't matter, it eventually becomes industrialized, ordered, known, standard, measured, stable, dull, boring. Characteristics change for everything. This is also why there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all management methods. So Agile is very good on the left-hand side for reducing reducing cost of change for experimentation, whereas Six Sigma outsourcing is very good on the right for reducing deviation, empires of scale, for producing empires of scale, and Lean tends to be very good in the middle, because it's all about reducing waste and learning. So no one-size-fits-all methods. So if we can observe climactic impacts, we can now start to apply doctrine. And doctrine are universally applicable approaches regardless of the context. So you take high-speed rail, massive engineering project, UK government. Box and wire diagram, we're trying to manage it that way. We can't. We turn it into a map. Suddenly, because we know no one-size-fits-all method applies, we go, well, this stuff we need to outsource to utility providers, this stuff we're going to build off-the-shelf products, this stuff we're going to build in-house with agile techniques. Single organization, multiple methods at the same time. So we start to use appropriate methods. First point of doctrine. Now, beforehand, we had no map. So in government, we would tend to yo-yo. We would go Six Sigma everywhere, and somebody would go, Agile works really well over here. So we'd go Agile everywhere. And then somebody would go, Lean works really well over here. So we'd go Lean everywhere. Or we tend to outsource too much. We'd apply, we wouldn't understand the landscape. We'd outsource it all. Some parts efficiently treated, lots of it, incur excessive change control costs. It's uncharted. It's always going to happen. So we use appropriate methods. And then cloud, it becomes easy. Cloud's about shifting from product to utility, that's all. So there's certain parts of the map suitable for provision as cloud services. Other parts you build on cloud services. Then we start to take maps and compare them, borders. immigration. And the green dots are duplications. And we find there's loads of duplication going on. In fact, within government, we have 118 different workflow systems for registering prisoners into prisons. We have to do it 118 different ways. But we thought we were bad. The private sector beats us hands down. One global corporate, 380 customized versions of the same ERP system built by 380 different teams doing exactly the same thing. And I thought that would never be beaten. Then we got up to 740. Now I'm dealing with one where it looks like it's about 1,000. It's just amazing. So once you start then mapping, you start getting rid of duplication bias, you start organizing in small teams, like higher cell-based structure or Amazon two-pizza model. And then you start discovering you have different types of people. You have some people who are good in the pioneering, the uncharted space, some people who are good in the middle, productizing, some people who are good at the far right-hand side, brilliant in that space, at industrializing. And you start to discover you don't have one culture, you have 3 different cultures in a single organization. So you build a structure of pioneers, settlers, and town planners, a system of theft where basically the pioneers discover the new, settlers turn it into useful products, town planners industrialize, and the pioneers, just to keep up with the fact they lose everything, build on the components from the town planners. So it works very simply. Town planners shift products to utilities, rapid team of pioneers build on top, settlers identify common patterns, libraries, and components. Those are eventually industrialized. The pioneers build on top of that, and the cycle repeats over and over. And you end up with the ever-growing platform because you've designed around evolution. Basic form of doctrine. Now, if you're interested in this, by the way, GCHQ has published a document called Boiling Frogs. It's an open document which describes a 3-party system, how you organize it. And that's for an organization which deals with the most fiercest form of competition. And if you're really interested in that structure, the history, it comes from this book, Accidental Empires, published in 1993. So we've known about this for a long time. Now, for my sake, I implemented this back in 2005. There were several reasons. One, because it worked, and secondly, because I'd previously implemented a 2-mode structure, and that had problems. Actually, my 2-mode structure didn't look like this. I didn't have a map at the time. I just thought it would be a really good idea to have 2 different parts of the organization, one focused on the future, one sort of focused on making things operate well. It turned out to be a bit of a sort of future nightmare. I like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. So I had my Eloys, I didn't call them that, but that's basically what they were, my digital exciting group, and I had my Morlocks, who are the sort of people in the dungeon keeping everything running. And it basically operated like this. The Morlocks would create the components, the Eloys would build new things on top of it, then of course those things would start to industrialize. And so they would say, this is really cool, you need to industrialize it, and the Morlocks would go, it's too flaky, it doesn't work, it's buggy, it's not documented, what am I supposed to do with that? And of course, then the Eloys would get really annoyed with this, so they would build new stuff on top of new stuff and say, this is really cool, can you industrialize that? And the same conversation would happen. So what I had originally ended up with is what I called the never-growing platform and Spaghetti Junction, which was a bit of a disaster. So back in 2005, I changed. Now, I mention that because, well, suddenly everybody's talking about 2-mode structures. And sorry, I don't think it's a particularly sensible idea. I've got to say I feel people are being led up the wrong path here. So, once you observe the environment, once you start to understand climactic patterns, once you understand basic forms of doctrine, then you get into leadership, which is finally where we get to strategy. And strategy is all about context-specific forms of gameplay. So there I was with my map of the environment. I knew platform and compute. I knew it was going to evolve. That was one of those climactic patterns, so I could anticipate that. I also knew other patterns. Success breeds inertia. Efficiency enables innovation. Higher order systems create new sources of worth. So as electricity became a commodity, we created radio, television, lighting, etc. Now this gave me multiple wheres that I could attack. And that's important because when people say the key to strategy is why, I'm afraid that's wrong. Why is a relative statement. Why here over there? What's important is to start with where you can attack. So we decided to build the first platform as a service. That's where we focused. We guessed or could anticipate someone was going to provide a compute as a service. I thought it was going to be Google. Turns out it was Amazon. We knew how to exploit people building on top of our system through a particular ecosystem model known as innovate, leverage, commoditize. And we also knew we could manipulate the market with an open approach. So this is an example of context-specific gameplay. So then we acted, we launched Zimkey, which was the first ever platform as a service, JavaScript, front and back end, in 2006. And it was growing like hotcakes, 200% per calendar month. By June, we were up to 2.8 million API calls. Then Amazon launched, so we were like, home run, this is fantastic. Then we had the consultants in, and the consultant said, well, this cloud, it's not the future. In fact, the three things we were doing, 3D printing, mobile phones as cameras, and cloud, were not the future. The future was, in fact, 3D television. So we should shut it all down and concentrate on 3D TV. Can I just, hands up, who uses cloud? All right, keep your hands up. Who uses mobile phones as cameras? Okay, 3D printers, yeah, okay. Who uses regularly 3D TV? Right. Super fantastic. Okay, so we shut down Zimkey. I gave the concepts and ideas to a good friend of mine, James Waters. He's used that in a system called Cloud Foundry, which is running exactly the same play. And they're doing really well. Apparently, it's valued at 2.8 billion, which is good for two reasons. One, it tells me that context-specific play can be used from one business to another. Secondly, it gives me 2.8 billion reasons to hate consultants. Okay, so then I started running strategy for a company called Canonical, provides Ubuntu. We mapped out the environment in 2008. Have you all heard of Ubuntu? Yes? Well, we were 2% of the cloud, 2% of the operating system market. We mapped it out. Cost me about $700,000, 18 months. We took over 70% of all cloud computing. And then I started doing this in government in 2010 with something called the Better for Less paper. Okay, so lessons. One, strategy is iterative. It is a cycle. Second, you learn by playing the game. You have to act. Third, it's really important to understand your environment. So you need to observe the landscape. Really simple to do. It's all Creative Commons, this stuff. Focus on user needs. Understand your value chain. Then understand how your value chain is evolving. So simply produce a map. That's all you need to do. Once you have that, you will start learning. So if you observe the environment, you will learn climactic patterns, things like everything evolves, characteristics change, no one size fits all. There are, in fact, many patterns which you can learn. And once you learn those patterns, you can start to anticipate actually how your market is changing. Then you get into doctrine, which is things like use appropriate methods, use small teams, design for constant evolution. And there are many forms of doctrine you will discover. And then you get into leadership and gameplay. So this is the point where you can start to determine where to attack and also start learning context-specific forms of gameplays, different forms of ecosystem models, different ways of manipulating the market. Iterative, learn by acting, understand your environment. It's all about crossing the river by feeling the stones. So I want to give you the anti-pattern, because that's how you should, or I believe you should do things, but I want to talk about how things actually are done. So most companies do not observe the environment. And the first sign of this is the fact that they don't use any form of mapping, and they try to run themselves with stories. There is a second side. And for this, I'm going to use an example called Chess World. I want you to imagine you live in a world where everybody plays chess. And how well you play the game determines your rank in this world. But the interesting thing is no one's ever seen a chessboard. All you've ever seen are these characters on a screen. And the way you play the game, really simple. You're playing against an opponent, you press a button, they see what you've pressed, they counter, you counter, they counter, and the game continues for a very, very long time. Now, what will happen is people will take these sequences and start to discover magic sequences within them, secrets of success. So if you press pawn, I should respond with, I don't know, knight, knight, bishop. And then you will play a game against somebody who will see the board. And you will move, and they will counter, and you will move, and they will counter, and you will have lost. And you'll be like, what the fiddlesticks happened there? How is that possible? Maybe it's, you'll start grabbing at things. Maybe it's the speed at which they press the button. Maybe they're a happy sort of person, it's culture. All sorts of things. Well, the reason why you lose is you exist in what's called a low-level situational awareness environment. You are meme copying, secrets of success, backward causality. They will win all the time because they live in a high-level situational awareness environment, context-specific. And it's that because they have those three aspects. You have position of pieces relative to an anchor, the board, and then you can see movement, so you can learn. So what would you use to learn in chess? Would you use secrets of success sequences, or would you use the board? And what do you use to learn in business? Okay, well, the honest truth is we generally tend to use memes. And Dilbert says it best. I hired a management consultant to teach us something he calls backward causation. I studied the most successful companies, and if you imitate them, you feel as if you have a strategy. Number one, sponsor a golf tournament so your CEO can meet celebrities. Profits, here we come. All right? So we take that. See number one, we're just going to change the last one to number two, be digital. Or number three, go big data. Is exactly the same. Now, of course, people will say we're not just copying. But if you look at the strategy documents of most companies and you rip out purchasing decisions, operational details, implementation details, and tactical choices like BYOD, or bring your own disaster, as it's commonly called, this is all the how, what, and when of action. The why we do stuff is generally everybody else's. Everyone else is doing social media, big data, IoT. We've got to do the same. It's like asking a general, why does a general bombard a hill? And them responding, because 67% of other successful generals bombard hills. So that's what we do. Or because bombing a hill would make a good story. Or because that's what Uber would do. So how bad is copying in business? Well, I went around recording loads of events, listening to people talk about strategy, and I recorded what I call business-level abstractions of a healthy strategy, or BLAs for short. Here are the common BLAs. Digital business, big data, disruptive, innovative, collaborative, competitive advantage, ecosystem, blah, blah, blah. Then I added these strategy documents together from different companies, and I created a blah template. Our strategy is blah. We will lead a blah effort of the market through our use of blah and blah to build a blah, 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 blah. And then I combined the common blahs and the blah templates and auto-generated 64 different strategies. Right, number one. Our strategy is customer focus. We will lead a disruptive effort of the market through our use of innovative social media and big data to build a collaborative cloud-based ecosystem. This, of course, is all gibberish. Number two, our strategy is innovative digital business. We will lead a growth effort of the market through our use of innovative, customer-focused, competitive. I can barely say the words. So I sent them around and got 400 responses. Basically, this is more or less the exact wording from our business plan. I've seen 2 of these used already, and are you for hire? So So a friend of mine put this online. This is strategy as a service, by the way. So if you ever need a strategy, type the URL. It will automatically generate you one. If you don't like it, just press refresh. So the third sign that things really are a problem, I have to go all the way back to ancient Greek history and Themistocles. So Themistocles, ancient politician, Greek general, had a problem. The Persians were invading. So he had choices. He could defend around Athens, defend around Thebes. What he decided to do was to block off the Straits of Artemisium, force the Persians along the coastal road into Thermopylae, a narrow pass where about 4,000 Greeks could defend against 170,000 odd Persians. Now, in the 4,000 odd Greeks, there were 300 Spartans. Fantastic. Good, excellent. So I want you to imagine now you are on the field of battle. It's the night before the battle. Themistocles is standing in front of you and says, I do not understand the landscape. I do not understand the environment. But have no fear, because I have created a SWOT diagram. Strengths, a well-trained Spartan army. High level of motivation not to become a Persian slave. Weaknesses, the E4s might stop the Spartans turning up. A truckload of Persians are turning up. Opportunities, get rid of the Persians, get rid of the Spartans. Threats, the Persians get rid of us, and the Oracle says a really dodgy film might be produced a few thousand years later. Okay, what do you think is more effective in determining and communicating strategy in battle? A map or a SWOT? Good, excellent. So, what do you use in business? A SWOT. Fantastic, because we don't have maps. The point about this is storytelling, meme copying, SWOT diagrams, other magic frameworks give you no mechanism of learning. You don't have position, you don't have an anchor, you don't have a movement. You can't do what we've done in the military for thousands of years, is learn from one battle to another. So I'll go back to this question. Chess or alchemy? There's the signs: navigation, learning, strategy. Chess, it's visual, it's context specific, it's about position and movement. Alchemy, I'm afraid that's all storytelling, secrets of success, magic thinking. This is a high-level situational awareness environment in terms of chess. It's low in terms of alchemy. Military is over there. Business, I'm afraid, is over there. So then somebody says, well, does it really matter? Because, I'd rather have a first-rate execution and a second-rate strategy. Jamie Dimon's statement, great one. So population study, companies in Silicon Valley, left-hand side level of strategic play against the use of open to manipulate a market. The bigger the bubbles, the more companies in that group. Now, if execution rules, the right-hand side will be doing really well. If strategy rules, the top would be doing really well. And the answer is, I'm afraid strategy seems to be the key thing. So, Dimon's doctrine that execution is the key to a strategy success, as Professor Martin said, is as flawed as it is popular. So, quick recap. Strategy is iterative. It's a cycle. You learn by playing the game. You have to act. You need to understand your environment. If you can observe the landscape, then you can learn about climactic patterns, doctrine, all sorts of forms of context-specific strategic play. Does it matter? Yes. But here's the good news. It doesn't matter for most of you. And the reason why it doesn't matter for most of you is because you're competing against others who are equally blind. And the answer, I'm afraid, is it's okay to suck as long as everyone else does. And at that point, I will say thank you very much, because I'm between you and the drinks.